On March 1st, 2026, Iran did something it had never done before in the history of modern warfare. It fired a hypersonic glide vehicle at American forces in combat, the first known operational deployment of a hypersonic weapon against U.S. military targets in history. The weapon was the Fattah-2. The target was American military infrastructure in the Middle East. And the moment that missile left its launcher and began its unpredictable, maneuvering atmosphere-skimming flight at speeds the U.S. Navy's most advanced interceptors were barely designed to engage, the rules governing how American aircraft carriers can operate in contested waters changed permanently, not hypothetically, not in a classified threat assessment that no one reads until it is too late. In combat, in real time, in a conflict that the world was watching, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, two of the most powerful warships ever constructed by any civilization in human history, were operating in the region. Every U.S. defense analyst, every naval strategist, every admiral sitting in the 5th Fleet Command Center in Bahrain was looking at the same question at the same moment. If the Fattah-2 reaches those carriers, does the carrier strike group's defense stop it? And the honest answer, the one that the technical specifications and the physics of the engagement make unavoidable, is, maybe, under optimal conditions, against a single missile. Against a coordinated swarm? Nobody knows, and nobody wants to find out. Like and subscribe, because the Fattah-2's first combat deployment in 2026 is the most important single development in naval threat technology since the invention of the anti-ship cruise missile. And understanding exactly why requires going deep into the physics, the tactics, and the strategic implications of a weapon that was designed specifically to kill the most expensive and most powerful naval assets the United States possesses. To understand the Fattah-2, you have to understand the difference between what came before it and what it actually is. For decades, the primary threat to U.S. aircraft carriers from regional powers like Iran was the anti-ship cruise missile, a subsonic or supersonic weapon that flies at low altitude, guided by active radar or GPS toward its target. The U.S. Navy built its Carrier Strike Group defense architecture specifically to defeat these threats. The Aegis combat system, the integrated radar, command, and weapon system fitted to Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, was designed to track, engage, and destroy incoming cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. The SM-6 interceptor, the primary weapon used in terminal phase defense against aerial threats, was built and tested specifically to engage these categories of weapons. Against subsonic cruise missiles, the system is highly effective. Against supersonic cruise missiles, it requires faster processing and quicker engagement windows, but has demonstrated capability in combat environments, including the Red Sea during Houthi attack operations in 2024 and 2025. Then Iran changed the problem. Like and subscribe, because the fundamental shift the Fattah-2 represents is not just a speed increase, it is a complete restructuring of the physics of the engagement problem that every air defense system on every U.S. warship was designed to solve. The Fattah-1, unveiled by the IRGC in June 2023, was already a generational jump over Iran's previous missile technology. It is a 2-stage solid-fuel ballistic missile with a range of 400 kilometers and speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15, between 13 and 15 times the speed of sound. At Mach 15, the weapon covers 1 kilometer in approximately 0.22 seconds. It uses a maneuverable reentry vehicle with thrust vector controls, meaning it can adjust its trajectory during the final descent phase, making its impact point unpredictable from the moment the interceptor launches to the moment of impact. Against the Fattah-1, the U.S. Navy's Aegis system must solve an engagement problem that is already significantly harder than the cruise missile problem it was primarily designed for. The Fattah-2, first unveiled in November 2023 and first used in combat on March 1st, 2026, takes everything about the Fattah-1 that was already difficult to intercept and makes it fundamentally harder. The Fattah-2 uses a hypersonic glide vehicle, a completely different flight profile from any ballistic missile Iran had previously deployed. Where a ballistic missile follows a predictable arc through the upper atmosphere and then descends steeply toward its target, a hypersonic glide vehicle does something entirely different. After the boost phase lifts it above the atmosphere, the glide vehicle separates and enters the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speed, Mach 15, approximately 18,500 kilometers per hour, but then it glides. It flies through the atmosphere at hypersonic speed at much lower altitudes than a ballistic missile reentry, maintaining lift and using that lift to maneuver. It can change direction in both pitch and yaw. It can pull toward a target, fly away from it, bank to approach from an unexpected angle, or perform what researchers describe as a skip glide, bouncing off the upper atmosphere to extend range and complicate tracking. Like and subscribe. Because the distinction between a ballistic trajectory and a hypersonic glide trajectory is the entire reason the Fattah-2 represents a new threat category. And understanding that distinction is the key to understanding why the U.S. Navy's existing defenses face a fundamentally different problem. The geometry of the engagement problem is where the physics becomes most alarming for carrier strike group commanders. When a conventional ballistic missile approaches a carrier from long range, the Aegis radar on the escort destroyers can detect it at high altitude during its boost phase and track it through its predictable arc for many minutes before it reaches the carrier's defensive perimeter. That tracking time is the engagement window, the period during which the system can calculate the intercept point, launch an SM-6, and destroy the incoming weapon before it reaches the ship. More tracking time means more opportunities to engage and destroy. The SPY-6 radar on the newest Aegis ships can detect ballistic threats at extreme ranges, giving the system minutes of engagement time for a high-altitude ballistic threat. The Fattah-2's hypersonic glide profile strips away most of that engagement window. Because the glide vehicle flies at much lower altitudes than a ballistic missile reentry, the Earth's curvature hides it from ship-based radar until it is already close. Once the Aegis radar detects the incoming Fattah-2 breaching the radar horizon, the reaction window, the time available to launch an SM-6 and position it for a successful intercept, shrinks to seconds, not minutes, seconds. And during those seconds, the glide vehicle is maneuvering. It is not flying a predictable trajectory that the fire control computer can extrapolate forward and calculate the intercept point. It is actively steering away from where the fire control computer predicted it would be. The SM-6, traveling at Mach 3.5, is being asked to intercept a target traveling at Mach 15 that is actively maneuvering to avoid it. The speed ratio, SM-6 at Mach 3.5, Fattah-2 at Mach 15, means that for every meter the SM-6 covers in its intercept approach, the Fattah-2 covers more than 4. Chinese researchers who published an analysis on hypersonic glide vehicle interception calculated that for an interceptor to reliably destroy a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle, it must achieve 2 to 3 times the lateral acceleration of the target. Even if a partial collision occurs, they warned that the reinforced structure of the hypersonic glide vehicle may survive the partial impact and continue toward the target. Like and subscribe, because the math of a Mach 3.5 interceptor trying to kill a Mach 15 maneuvering glide vehicle leaves almost no margin for error, and margin for error is what saves an aircraft carrier when it is the target. The IISS, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, one of the most rigorous independent military analysis organizations in the world, noted in its assessment of Iranian anti-ship capability that Iran maintains a stockpile of between 1,000 and 1,200 anti-ship cruise, missiles of various types alongside its hypersonic program, the Abu Mahdi at 1,000 kilometers range, the Ra'ad at 350 kilometers, the Ghadir sea skimmer, the Qadr and Noor systems derived from Chinese designs, the Nasr-1 for short-range coastal defense. Iran was not betting its carrier-killing strategy entirely on the Fattah. 2. It was building a layered anti-access strategy in which the Fattah-2 was the apex weapon of a comprehensive arsenal designed to saturate and overwhelm carrier strike group defenses from multiple vectors simultaneously. The saturation problem is where defense analysts converge on their most alarming assessments. Against a single Fattah-2, the analysis is cautiously optimistic for the U.S. jamming of the glide vehicle's guidance sensors, the carrier's own 25-knot sprint speed that complicates the targeting solution, the Phalanx CIWS for last-ditch close-in defense. All of these layers working together give the carrier strike group a fighting chance against a single incoming hypersonic glide vehicle. But Iran does not fire single missiles. Iran fires salvos. And the saturation problem that a coordinated Iranian saturation attack creates, multiple Fattah-2s alongside Abu Mahdi, cruise missiles alongside drone swarms alongside potentially YJ-12 supersonic anti-ship missiles acquired from China or Russia, all arriving from different vectors at different altitudes at different times, is the scenario that exhausts the limited number of SM-6 interceptors carried by the escort destroyers before the last incoming weapon is destroyed. Like and subscribe, because the saturation math, multiple hypersonic glide vehicles plus cruise missiles plus drones all arriving simultaneously, is the specific threat profile that the U.S. Navy's carrier defense architecture has never been tested against at the scale Iran was theoretically capable of assembling before its missile infrastructure was degraded in the 2026 conflict. The combat record of the Fattah-2 in the 2026 conflict provides important but incomplete evidence for assessing the actual performance of the weapon against U.S. and Israeli air defenses. Iran first deployed the Fattah-2 on March 1, 2026, the day after Operation Epic Fury began. Iranian military sources told Al-Gad that the advanced system was used in the opening round of retaliatory strikes. Caspian Post analysis, documented an Iranian claim that the Fattah-2 struck an Israeli command center, noting that the missile's trajectory and speed resembled Russia's Oreshnik hypersonic missile deployed in Ukraine, and that U.S. and Israeli air defense systems faced extreme challenges intercepting it. A video appeared to show a Fattah-2 maneuvering to evade 2 Israeli air defense interceptors before reaching its target. These claims, like virtually all claims made during the conflict by any party, require independent verification that is extremely difficult to obtain. What is verifiable is that the Fattah-2 was launched in combat for the first time on March 1st, 2026. What is contested is how many were launched, what they targeted, how many were intercepted, and what damage they caused. What is undisputed is that Iran demonstrated operational capability with a hypersonic glide vehicle in combat, a threshold that no regional power in the Middle East had previously crossed. Like and subscribe, because the first combat use of a hypersonic glide vehicle by any regional power in the Middle East is a strategic milestone that belongs in the same category as the first combat use of anti-ship missiles, a capability that, once demonstrated in combat, cannot be undiscovered, cannot be uninvented, and permanently changes the threat calculus for every navy operating in the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln's specific defensive architecture against the Fattah-2 threat is worth examining in detail because it illustrates both the genuine capability of U.S. carrier defense and its genuine limits. Abraham Lincoln does not travel alone. It is the centerpiece of a carrier strike group that typically includes 2 or 3 Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyers, a Ticonderoga class cruiser, and submarine assets. The destroyers carry the Aegis combat system with the SPY-6 radar array, a phased array system with significantly improved sensitivity, resolution, and track capacity compared to the older SPY-1 radar it is replacing. Each destroyer carries a magazine of SM-6 interceptors for terminal defense and SM-3 interceptors for mid-course intercepts of ballistic threats. The carrier itself travels at up to 25 knots, fast enough to meaningfully complicate the targeting, solution for missiles programmed against a fixed coordinate, but not fast enough to outrun a weapon traveling at Mach 15. The electronic warfare dimension of the defense is significant. The Fattah-2's guidance system, whether it uses GPS, inertial navigation, or active radar, is theoretically vulnerable to jamming and spoofing during the glide phase. If the U.S. Navy's electronic warfare systems can corrupt the guidance signal during the seconds between radar, acquisition, and impact, they can deflect the weapon away from the carrier. But electronic warfare operates in a contest. Iran's guidance systems have been designed with jamming resistance in mind, and the effectiveness of any specific EW technique against any specific guidance system is classified information that neither side advertises. What the defense community's consensus comes to, across WION analysis, IISS assessments, Aerospace Global News technical evaluations, and defense priorities. Expert commentary is a picture of genuine but uncertain American defensive capability. Against a single Fattah-2, the layered defense can probably work. Against a coordinated multi-vector saturation attack combining Fattah-2s, cruise missiles, and drones in numbers sufficient to exhaust SM-6 magazines before the last threat is defeated, the outcome is genuinely uncertain. And genuinely uncertain when the target is a $6.2 billion aircraft carrier with thousands of sailors aboard is a condition the U.S. Navy's operational planning must take extremely seriously. Like and subscribe. Because the phrase genuinely uncertain when applied to the survivability of a U.S. supercarrier against Iranian hypersonic attack is one of the most consequential assessments in modern naval strategy. And the 2026 conflict has moved that phrase from theoretical to operational. The 2026 conflict's impact on the Fattah-2 threat is itself complicated. U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iranian missile production and storage infrastructure during Operation Epic Fury significantly degraded Iran's ability to produce and deploy large numbers of Fattah missiles. The underground silos that stored Iran's ballistic and hypersonic missile inventory were targeted with GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, the 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs delivered by B-2, Spirit stealth bombers that were specifically designed to reach hardened underground targets. The Mashar petrochemical complex, struck 5 times, was the domestic source of solid rocket propellant precursors for Iran's missile program. Trump stated publicly that Iran retained only 21 to 22% of its pre-war missile arsenal, but 22% of Iran's pre-war missile arsenal in the specific context of a Fattah-2 saturation attack against a carrier strike group is a number that requires careful interpretation. If Iran had 50 Fattah-2s before the conflict, 22% means approximately 11. If it had 20, it means approximately 4. The precise pre-conflict inventory of Fattah-2 specifically, as opposed to the broader Iranian missile arsenal, is not publicly documented with confidence. What is documented is that the weapon was fired in combat, that it represents a genuine hypersonic glide vehicle capability, and that Iran retains some number of them even after the most devastating military campaign against its missile infrastructure in the nation's history. Like and subscribe. Because the combination of a genuinely capable hypersonic weapon and a significantly degraded but not eliminated inventory creates an asymmetric threat profile that will shape U.S. carrier operations in the Gulf and the wider Middle East for years after this conflict ends. The broader implication of Iran's Fattah-2 for global naval strategy extends far beyond this specific conflict. The United States Navy's aircraft carrier was the dominant instrument of American power projection for 80 years because no regional power could credibly threaten to sink one. Carrier strike groups could sail into contested waters and establish air superiority because the weapons available to regional adversaries lacked the speed, the maneuverability, and the range to reliably defeat the carrier's layered defenses. The equation was asymmetric in America's favor. Threatening a carrier was possible in theory, but prohibitively difficult in practice. Iran's Fattah-2 represents a weapon, not yet proven to have achieved a carrier kill, but proven to exist, proven to have been launched in combat, and proven to be difficult enough to intercept that no one can state with confidence that a coordinated salvo would fail against a carrier strike group's defenses. The moment that credibility is established, the moment can Iran sink a U.S. carrier, shifts from theoretical to genuinely uncertain. The political and strategic calculus of deploying carriers into range of Iranian missiles changes. Every carrier deployment into the Gulf becomes a political decision that must weigh the operational value of the carrier's presence against the strategic cost of losing it. Naval theorists describe this as the currency of deterrence changing. The carrier's value as a deterrent depends on its apparent invulnerability. If adversaries come to believe, rightly or wrongly, that they have a credible chance of sinking a carrier with hypersonic weapons, the deterrent value of that carrier in contested waters within hypersonic range diminishes. Iran's Fattah-2 did not sink the USS Abraham Lincoln or the USS Gerald R. Ford. But it introduced the question of whether it could, and that question alone represents a strategic accomplishment that Iran's missile scientists set out to achieve and appear to have partially reached. Like and subscribe, because the rules for U.S. aircraft carrier operations near Iran changed on March 1, 2026, when a hypersonic glide vehicle left an Iranian launcher for the first time in combat. And this channel will be here tracking every development in the ongoing contest between hypersonic weapons and the defenses designed to stop them.